Hello everyone. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy our stories, please like the video and subscribe for more. And now, turn off the lights, close your eyes, and relax. My name is Gonzalo. I am 38 years old, and for 4 months I've been trying to escape an organization that took everything from me. It all started when I lost my job. I had been with the same logistics company for 12 years, working my way up from warehouse associate to shift supervisor. And one day HR called me into the office and told me they were letting me go. Restructuring, they said. Downsizing. Nothing personal. They gave me a severance package that looked generous until I calculated how many months I could survive on it while looking for another job. The first few weeks were optimistic. I updated my resume, signed up for every job board, and sent applications to dozens of companies. But the answers never came. Or they came in the form of automated emails telling me my profile did not match what they were looking for. At 40, the labor market looks at you like you are an expired product. That was when I saw the ad on social media. Free personal and professional development course. Unlock your potential. Reinvent your career. Become the best version of yourself. The photos showed smiling people in bright rooms, people in suits shaking hands, success charts pointing upward. Normally, I would have ignored that kind of advertising. They had always seemed like scams disguised as motivation, gurus selling smoke to desperate people. But I was desperate. I had been out of work for 3 months, my savings were running out, and I was starting to feel like I would never find a decent job again. So I signed up. The course was held in an office building downtown. When I arrived on the first day, a young woman with a perfect smile and an impeccable suit welcomed me. Her name was Natalia, and she told me she was a personal development advisor. She guided me to a room where 15 other people were sitting in chairs arranged in a semicircle. We all had something in common. The look of someone who has hit rock bottom and is desperately looking for a way out. The leader of the course appeared 10 minutes past the scheduled time. His name was Victor Reyes, and he had the charisma of a television preacher. Perfectly combed silver hair, tailored gray suit, gold watch that shone every time he gestured, and a deep voice that seemed to vibrate directly in the center of your chest. "You are here because the system has failed you," he said, walking among us like a general reviewing his troops. "You are here because you have been told that you are not worth enough. But I tell you that is a lie. Each of you has unlimited potential. You just need the right tools to unlock it." For the next 3 hours, he spoke to us about a winning mindset, visualizing success, and how our limiting beliefs prevented us from reaching our goals. It was the typical self-help speech I had heard 1,000 times, but Victor said it in a way that made it seem new, that made it seem true, that made it seem exactly what we needed to hear. At the end of the session, he asked us to come back the next day for the second part of the course. It was still free, he assured us. It was his way of giving back to society everything society had given him. I went back the next day, and the next, and the next. The sessions gradually intensified. We started with self-knowledge exercises that seemed harmless, writing our fears on a piece of paper, sharing our insecurities with the group, identifying the moments in our lives when we had felt most ashamed. Victor said it was necessary to expose our wounds in order to heal them. Then came the commitment exercises, small tasks we had to complete between sessions to show we were committed to our personal growth. At first they were simple things like getting up an hour earlier, exercising, writing a gratitude journal. But little by little they became more demanding, cutting contact with negative people in our lives, dedicating more hours to the course, recruiting friends and family to attend an introductory session. I completed all the tasks without questioning them. I was so desperate to find work, so in need of feeling like I had some control over my life, that I did everything Victor asked me to. And it worked. Or so I thought. After 2 weeks in the course, I got a job interview. Victor had taught me nonverbal communication techniques, helped me rewrite my resume, and made me practice answers for difficult questions. I left the interview convinced they were going to hire me. They did not hire me. But Victor told me that was part of the process, that the universe was testing my determination. that if I kept working on myself, if I remained committed to the method, success would inevitably arrive. It was in the third week that things started to go wrong. Victor announced that the basic course had ended, and that those who wanted to continue advancing could sign up for the Deep Transformation Program. This program was not free. It cost 3,000 euros, payable in monthly installments if necessary. But Victor assured us it was an investment we would recover tenfold when we reached our true potential. I did not have 3,000 euros. I barely had enough to pay the next month's rent. But Natalia, the advisor who had welcomed me the first day, called me into her office and offered me a solution. "We can finance it internally for you," she said with that smile that was already starting to seem rehearsed to me. "You just have to sign a collaboration agreement. In exchange for the training, you commit to working with us for a certain period once you complete the program. It is like a paid internship, but in reverse." She showed me a 20-page contract full of fine print. I was exhausted, confused, desperate to move forward with the only thing that seemed to give me hope. I signed without reading. That was my first mistake. The Deep Transformation Program was completely different from the basic course. The sessions were no longer in the bright room of the office building, but in a place on the outskirts. An old converted warehouse with no windows and fluorescent lights that flickered constantly. The place smelled damp and stale, as if the air had not been refreshed in years. The walls were painted a dark gray that absorbed what little light there was, and the chairs were metal, uncomfortable, designed so you could not relax even for a second. The exercises were no longer about self-knowledge, but about breaking. That is what Victor called it with pride, as if it were a revolutionary method he himself had invented. We had to break with everything that defined us in order to rebuild ourselves from scratch, he said. Break with our previous relationships because they anchored us to the past. Break with our beliefs because they limited us. Break with our previous identity because it was the identity of a loser. They made us stand for hours without moving while Victor walked among us screaming that we were weak, that we were failures, that we would never achieve anything if we did not submit completely to the process. If someone wobbled or asked to sit down, the rest of us had to scream at them that they were a coward, that they were sabotaging their own growth, that they were disappointing us all. They deprived us of sleep with sessions that lasted until 4 or 5 in the morning, and then woke us up at 7 for the morning affirmation session. We slept 4 hours at most, sometimes 3, sometimes less. Victor said sleep was a refuge for the weak, that true leaders did not need rest because their energy came from within. They fed us barely enough to keep us conscious. 1 meal a day, usually plain white rice with boiled vegetables, no flavor, no substance. Victor said hunger sharpened the mind and eliminated distractions from the body. That food was a mundane pleasure that took us away from our true purpose. And there were the rituals. Once a week they gathered us in a circle around Victor, and we had to repeat phrases he dictated to us. At first, they were normal motivational affirmations. I am capable of achieving everything I set my mind to. I deserve success. My potential is unlimited. But gradually they changed. The phrases became stranger, darker, more like oaths of loyalty than self-help mantras. Victor is my guide. Only through Victor will I find my way. My previous life was a lie. My true family is here. We repeated them over and over until the words lost their meaning and became pure sounds that resonated in our heads, even when we were alone. It was in the 6th week that I tried to leave for the first time. I had met my brother for dinner. It was the first time I had seen him since I started the course because Victor had recommended we distance ourselves from the negative influences of our previous life. And my brother had always been skeptical of this kind of thing. As soon as he saw me, he knew something was wrong. He told me I had lost weight, that I had deep circles under my eyes, that I spoke in a strange way, repeating phrases that didn't sound like something I would say. He asked me what was happening, and I told him everything. The course, the contract, the rituals, the increasingly strong feeling that something was not right, but I couldn't identify exactly what it was. My brother looked at me with a mixture of horror and concern. That is a cult, he said. Gonzalo, you have to get out of there. Right now. I laughed at him. I told him he didn't know what he was talking about, that Victor just wanted to help us, that the program was working even if he couldn't see it. But that night, when I returned to my apartment, I started to think. I searched the internet for the name Victor Reyes, and found articles that froze my blood. Archived complaints, testimonies from former members, families who had lost their children in organizations with different names but identical methods. Victor had operated in other cities under other names, leaving a trail of people ruined financially and psychologically. The next day I went to the warehouse on the outskirts with the intention of telling them I was leaving, that I didn't want to continue, that they could keep the money I had already paid. But I was done. Natalia received me with her usual smile, but this time I saw something different in her eyes, something cold, something calculating. "Sit down, Gonzalo," she said. "We need to talk about your contract." She showed me the document I had signed weeks earlier, and this time I read it carefully. What I had signed was not a simple collaboration agreement. It was a covert servitude contract. I committed to working for the organization for 5 years, without pay as payment for the training received. If I left early, I had to pay a penalty of 50,000 euros. If I breached any clause, the organization had the right to take legal and extrajudicial measures to recover its investment. "This is not legal," I said with a trembling voice. Natalia smiled. "We have the best lawyers," she replied. "And we have something else. We have everything you shared in the group sessions. Your fears, your secrets, your shame. All recorded, all archived. Imagine what would happen if those recordings reached your family, your former co-workers, any company where you try to look for a job in the future." I froze. During the self-knowledge sessions, I had confessed things I had never told anyone. Past mistakes, dark thoughts, moments I was deeply ashamed of. I had believed it was a safe space, a place of healing, but it had all been a trap. Victor entered the office and sat in front of me. He was no longer smiling like the benevolent guru I had met the first day. Now his expression was that of a predator who knows his prey has no escape. "Everyone tries to leave at some point," he said calmly. "It is part of the ego's resistance process. But soon you will understand that your previous life no longer exists. Your future is here with us. The sooner you accept it, the less you will suffer." I tried to go to the police. They told me it was a civil matter, that I had to talk to a lawyer. I went to a lawyer and he told me the contract was technically valid, that the fine print condemned me, that I could try to fight, but it would cost me years and money I didn't have. I called my brother, but his number no longer worked. Later I discovered that someone had contacted him pretending to be me, telling him I didn't want to see him again, that I had decided to cut ties with my toxic family. My brother had believed it was me because the message came from my phone. They had completely isolated me. The following months were a nightmare from which I could not wake up. They forced me to move into a shared apartment with 5 other members of the organization. A small and neglected apartment where we slept on mattresses on the floor, and where there was always someone watching. I couldn't make a call, write a text, or go out on the street without someone accompanying me. They said it was for my own good, that the outside world was full of temptations that could sabotage my transformation process. They assigned me tasks that consumed every hour of my day. Recruiting new members in shopping malls and train stations, organizing informational events, making follow-up calls to people who had shown interest in the free course. We had quotas to meet. Every week we had to get at least 3 new people to attend an introductory session. If we didn't succeed, there were consequences. The consequences were what Victor called reconversion sessions. Hours locked in a small room while he and his closest advisors screamed at me that I was a traitor, an ingrate, a failure who didn't deserve the opportunity they were giving him. They forced me to repeat my mistakes out loud over and over, to apologize for failing the group, to promise I would do better. Sometimes the sessions lasted until dawn. Sometimes they included food deprivation for entire days. And there were also physical punishments disguised as strengthening exercises, holding uncomfortable positions for hours, running until exhaustion in the warehouse parking lot, ice water showers that they said purified the spirit, but only served to remind us that our bodies did not belong to us. And the worst part was that a part of me was starting to believe them. When you are so exhausted, so isolated, so devoid of any external reference, your mind starts to accept things that under normal circumstances you would reject immediately. I started to think that maybe they were right, that maybe my previous life was the problem, that maybe the only way to find peace was to surrender and accept my place in the organization. But then I met Pilar. Pilar was 41 years old and had been in the organization for 3 years. She had entered just like me, looking for work after the company where she had worked for 20 years closed overnight, looking for purpose after a painful divorce, looking for something to fill the void of a life that had crumbled without warning. But unlike the other members I knew, Pilar hadn't completely lost the light in her eyes. There was still something left of the person she had been before, a spark of rebellion that shone from time to time when Victor wasn't looking. They assigned us together for a recruitment campaign in the north of the city, and we started talking during the long car rides between different points where we set up our information stands, at first very carefully testing every word, not knowing if the other was trustworthy or if it was a spy of Victor sent to test our loyalty. But little by little, over weeks of whispered conversations, we let our guard down and recognized an ally in the other. "I know how to get out," she told me one day in a very low voice while we pretended to review the information brochures for the free course in the back seat of the car. "I have been planning it for months. I have found a way, but I can't do it alone. I need someone to help me and who is willing to risk everything." She explained that she had obtained copies of internal documents of the organization, proof of the illegal activities that Victor and his collaborators carried out. Hidden bank accounts, testimonies of former members who had been threatened, logs of the recordings they used to blackmail those who tried to leave. If we managed to get those documents out and deliver them to the appropriate authorities, we could end it all. The plan was risky. We had to access Victor's office during one of the weekly ceremonies, when all members were gathered in the main hall and security was relaxed. We had to copy the files from his computer and leave the building without anyone seeing us. And we had to do it without any of the other members, many of whom were already completely devoted to Victor, suspecting anything. We waited 3 weeks until the right moment arrived. It was a full moon night, which for the organization had a special meaning I never fully understood. All the members were gathered in the main hall, dressed in gray tunics we had been forced to buy with our own money, chanting the ritual phrases while Victor led the ceremony from his improvised pulpit. Pilar and I slipped out through a side door saying we were going to the bathroom. Victor's office was on the second floor, at the end of a hallway that was normally guarded, but that night was empty. Pilar knew the computer password because she had seen him type it months before, and had a photographic memory she had kept hidden from everyone. We went in, turned on the computer, connected an external hard drive, and started copying everything we found. That was when we heard footsteps in the hallway. Pilar signaled me to hide behind a cabinet while she stayed by the desk, pretending she was looking for something Victor had asked for. The door opened and Natalia entered. "What are you doing here?" she asked with that cold voice she used when she dropped the mask of kindness. "Victor asked me to look for some documents," Pilar replied without flinching. "For tomorrow's initiation ceremony." Natalia looked at her for several seconds that seemed eternal. Then she nodded slowly. "Hurry up," she said. "The ceremony is about to end." When she left, Pilar finished copying the files, and we left the office with our hearts beating so hard I was sure they could hear it from the floor below. That night, after everyone went to sleep, Pilar and I fled. We climbed out a bathroom window that faced a back alley. Pilar had loosened the screws of the grate for weeks, a little each day, until she could remove it without making noise. We walked for hours through empty streets, avoiding areas where we knew other organization members might be patrolling, until we reached a police station on the other side of the city, a station where Pilar knew an officer named Torres, who had been investigating organizations like Victor's for years, but had never obtained enough evidence to act. Torres received us at 4 in the morning with hot coffee and blankets. He listened to us for hours while we told him everything we had been through. And when we handed him the hard drive, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. The rest happened very fast. There was an investigation that lasted several weeks during which Pilar and I had to stay in safe houses, unable to contact anyone, not knowing if our families were okay. Then came the simultaneous raids on the warehouse on the outskirts and the office building downtown. Victor tried to flee but was detained at the airport with a plane ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. Natalia and the other advisors were arrested at their homes. The contracts were declared null and void due to coercion and fraud after a judge reviewed the evidence of the manipulation techniques they used. We former members were officially considered victims and were offered free psychological support, legal assistance, and help re-entering the workforce. That was 4 months ago. Now I am in a small apartment in another city, trying to rebuild my life from scratch. I have resumed contact with my brother, who cried when he saw me appear at his door and hugged me for several minutes without saying anything. He asked for forgiveness for believing I had sent those farewell messages and promised he would never doubt me again. I have started therapy with a psychologist specializing in cult manipulation victims, and although the process is slow and painful, I feel that every week I recover a small piece of who I used to be. I have even managed to get a job at a supermarket. Nothing spectacular, nothing like the shift supervisor position I had before, but it is honest work that allows me to pay the rent and start over. Pilar is also recovering. We write to each other from time to time to see how we are, to remind each other that we made it, that we got out of there alive. She has moved south, near her family, and has started studying to be a social worker. She says she wants to help other people who have gone through what we went through, but there are things I cannot forget. The nights I wake up repeating the ritual phrases without realizing it, the moments when I catch myself seeking Victor's approval in the words of any authority figure, the constant mistrust of anyone who offers me help, because I no longer know how to distinguish genuine kindness from manipulation in disguise. And sometimes, when I am alone in my apartment and the silence becomes too dense, I hear Victor's voice in my head telling me I am still a failure, that I will never achieve anything, that I should go back to them because it is the only place where I truly belong. I know that voice is not real. I know it is just the echo of months of manipulation and psychological abuse. I know that every day that passes it will become a little weaker until it finally disappears. But I also know there are thousands of people out there who are where I was a year ago. Desperate, vulnerable people, willing to believe in anyone who promises them a way out. People who at this moment are signing contracts without reading, confessing their most intimate secrets to strangers who will use them against them, losing little by little everything they are in exchange for the promise of becoming something better. And I know that Victor was not unique. There are hundreds like him, thousands maybe, operating under different names in different cities, hunting the weak, feeding on their desperation. That is why I tell my story, not for pity, but so others recognize the signs. So they know that when something seems too good to be true, it probably is. So they understand that asking for help is not weakness, that walking away from something that hurts you is not failure, that your value as a person does not depend on any guru or any transformation program, and above all, so they know that you can get out, even if it seems impossible, even if they have convinced you that you have no options, even if you feel there is nothing left of who you were before. You can get out. I did it. And if I could, anyone can. My name is Sergio. I am 31 years old, and 6 weeks ago I lost my wife without her ever leaving my side. Carmen and I had been together for 7 years, 5 of them married. We met at a mutual friend's wedding, danced all night, exchanged numbers, and 3 months later we were already living together. It was that fast, that intense. Our friends said we were the perfect couple, the kind that is always laughing, finishing each other's sentences, living in their own bubble of happiness. But bubbles always burst eventually. I do not know exactly when we started drifting apart. Maybe it was when I took the promotion that forced me to travel 3 weeks a month. Maybe it was when she left her job to try and start her own business, and the frustration consumed her little by little. Maybe it was simply the weight of routine, of repeating days, of conversations that stayed on the surface because neither of us had the energy to dive deeper. The fact is that we had been living like roommates rather than a couple for months. We slept in the same bed but without touching. We ate dinner together but looked at our phones. We said I love you out of habit, not conviction. It was Carmen who found the ad. A reconnection retreat for couples at an estate 2 hours from the city. 4 days of intensive therapy, communication exercises, and activities designed to rekindle the flame. The reviews were excellent. Couples who had been on the brink of divorce and had left more in love than ever. Testimonials that spoke of transformation, of rebirth, of second chances. I had my doubts. I have always been suspicious of that kind of thing. But Carmen looked at me with those green eyes that had won me over 7 years ago and told me that if we did not try now, maybe there would not be another chance. So we booked it. The estate was called The Rebirth, and it was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by olive groves that stretched to the horizon. The main building was an old converted manor house, with stone walls and small windows that barely let in light. Around it were several smaller cottages where the participating couples stayed. We were welcomed by a woman of about 60, with completely white hair and a maternal smile. She introduced herself as Esperanza and told us she was the founder of the program, along with her husband, a man named Aurelio, whom we would meet later. She explained that she had dedicated her life to saving marriages because hers had almost been destroyed decades ago, and she knew the pain that caused. There were 6 couples in total. They gathered us in a round room with sofas arranged in a circle and asked us to introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. I heard stories similar to ours, jobs that consumed all our time, broken communication, lost intimacy, the feeling of sharing a life with a stranger. The first day was fairly normal. Active listening exercises where we had to repeat what our partners said to show we understood. Couples walked through the olive groves where we had to talk about our best memories together. A community dinner where Esperanza spoke to us about the 5 phases of love and how most couples gave up in the 3rd without knowing that the last 2 were the most beautiful. Carmen was delighted. For the first time in months, I saw her really smile, laugh heartily, look at me like she used to. I thought maybe I had misjudged the retreat, that maybe it could really work. The second day, the vulnerability exercises began. Esperanza explained that to truly reconnect, we had to strip ourselves emotionally in front of each other, confess our deepest fears, admit our mistakes without excuses or justifications, expose the wounds we had caused and those we had received. Only then, she said, could we build something new on the ashes of the old. They separated us into different rooms and gave us very long questionnaires with increasingly intimate questions. Each couple had an assigned facilitator who supervised the process, someone who ensured we answered with total honesty. If you hesitated too long on an answer, the facilitator pressured you. If you tried to soften something, they made you rewrite it. At first, the questions were normal things like, what do you admire most about your partner? When was the last time you felt truly connected to them? What moment of your relationship would you keep forever? But then they became more invasive, more designed to bring out the worst in you. Have you ever thought about cheating? Is there something you have never told your partner? What secret would destroy your marriage if it came to light? Have you ever wished you hadn't gotten married? I answered honestly because that was the point of the exercise, or so I thought. I wrote about my fears of not being enough for Carmen, about the times work had seemed more important than her, about the guilt I felt for convincing her to move when she didn't want to. When we finished, after almost 4 hours of questioning, they made us exchange answers so that each one read what the other had written. Carmen had written things she had never told me in 7 years together. That sometimes she felt invisible next to me, like another piece of furniture in the house. That there were nights she locked herself in the bathroom to cry so I wouldn't hear her, and she wouldn't have to pretend everything was okay. That once, just once during an especially bad argument, she had fantasized about leaving everything and going far away without me, starting over somewhere where no one knew her. It hurt to read it. Every word was like a knife sticking into places I didn't know I had. But it also made me understand how much I had neglected her, how much I had taken for granted, how many times I had chosen other things over her. That night we talked for hours. We cried. We apologized. We made love for the first time in months. I thought the retreat was working, that we were healing. I had no idea what was coming next. The third day, Esperanza introduced us to her husband, Aurelio. He was a tall, thin man of about 65, with gray eyes that seemed to pierce through you when he looked at you, as if he could see things inside you that even you didn't know existed. He had completely white hair slicked back and wore white linen clothes that gave him an almost priestly appearance. He spoke with a soft, almost whispering voice that forced you to lean forward to hear him, which made everything he said seem like a shared secret, a truth reserved only for the chosen few. Aurelio explained that the first 2 days had been preparation. We had opened the wounds, expose them to the light, acknowledge the damage. Now the real work began. The reconstruction. To rebuild something, you first have to demolish it completely, he said, walking slowly among us, looking each of us in the eye for a few seconds before moving to the next. You cannot build a palace on the foundation of a shack. You have to tear them out by the roots, clear the ground, and start from the bare earth. The exercises that day were completely different from everything before. They made us sit face to face in couples in the center of the room, while the rest of the group formed a circle around us watching. We had to tell each other everything that bothered us about the other. Everything, without exception. No filters, no softening words, no fear of hurting. Aurelio said pain was necessary to clean infected wounds, that unsaid words rotted inside us like forgotten fruit, and slowly poisoned all the good that remained. I listened to couples destroy each other for hours. Men telling their wives they had stopped desiring them years ago, that every time they looked at them, they only saw the ghost of the person they had fallen in love with. Women confessing they had married under family pressure, not out of true love, that they had been faking orgasms and happiness for years. Secrets kept for decades gushing out like pus from a burst abscess, splashing everyone around. And Aurelio encouraged it all. More, he said when someone hesitated. Deeper. Don't hold anything back. The poison has to come out so the medicine can go in. When it was our turn, Carmen looked at me and started speaking. She said things that split me in half. That my ambition had turned me into someone cold. That sometimes she hated me for convincing her to leave her job to follow me to another city. That there were days she wished she had never met me. I remained silent. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if what I was hearing was the truth Carmen had always kept quiet, or if it was the exercise making her talk like that. When it was my turn, I could barely articulate a few clumsy sentences about missing our connection. Aurelio interrupted me. You are protecting her, he said. You are protecting yourself. That is not love. It is cowardice. If you truly love her, you owe her the complete truth. That night, Carmen didn't speak to me. She went to sleep with her back to me, and when I tried to touch her, she pulled away. I thought it was temporary, part of the healing process Esperanza had mentioned. But the next day, Carmen was a different person. She got up before dawn, when it was still dark, and the cold of the night seeped through the cracks in the window. I felt her move in the bed and opened my eyes just in time to see her dressing in silence, putting on the white clothes they had given us for the ceremonies instead of her normal clothes. I asked her where she was going, and she told me to a special session that Aurelio offered only to those who were ready for the next level. I asked why she hadn't told me anything, and she replied that she couldn't tell me, that it was part of her personal path, that I had to trust her as she had trusted me so many times. I stayed in bed watching her leave, with a knot in my stomach I didn't know how to interpret. During the community breakfast, I noticed that several of the other couples had also changed visibly. There was a clear division between those who had attended Aurelio's session and those who hadn't. The former spoke among themselves in low voices, exchanging knowing glances that excluded the rest, using words and phrases that seemed to have hidden meanings only they understood. They moved differently, more coordinated, as if following an invisible rhythm the rest of us couldn't hear. The second group, those of us who hadn't attended, looked at each other confused from across the dining room without understanding what was happening. We were the outsiders now, the uninitiated, the ones who still hadn't seen the light Aurelio promised. I tried to talk to Carmen alone all day, but there was always someone nearby. Esperanza walking casually down the same hallway. Aurelio appearing to ask a question about the previous day's exercise. One of the other converted participants taking her by the arm to lead her elsewhere. It was as if they had built an invisible wall around her, a wall made of people ensuring we were never truly alone. That afternoon, I approached another husband who seemed as lost as I was. His name was Marcos, and he had been married to Patricia for 20 years. He told me in a low voice that his wife had started talking about staying longer at the estate, that maybe this was the place where they truly belonged. We have to leave, he told me. This is not a couple's retreat. It is something else. I don't know what it is, but I don't like it. That night, I looked for Carmen after dinner and told her I wanted to leave. That the retreat was making me feel uncomfortable, that something wasn't right here, that Aurelio's method seemed more like manipulation than therapy. I told her we could find a couples therapist in the city, Someone with more conventional methods. Someone who didn't ask us to destroy each other to rebuild ourselves. Carmen looked at me as if she didn't recognize me, as if the man standing in front of her was a stranger who had entered her room without permission. "You are the problem," she said with a voice that didn't seem like hers. A flat voice without emotion, as if she were reading a script someone had written for her. "You have always been the problem. Aurelio has helped me see it clearly for the first time in 7 years. All the pain I have felt, all the loneliness, all the frustration, comes from you. From your selfishness. From your inability to truly love, to truly surrender. But I can heal. We can both heal. You just have to let yourself be guided like I have let myself be guided. You just have to trust Aurelio like I trust him." I told her we were leaving, to pack her things right now, that we could talk about all this at home, away from this place, away from these people who were filling her head with ideas that weren't hers. Carmen smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was the smile I had seen on Esperanza, on Aurelio, on all the converted participants. An empty, mechanical smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I can't leave," she said. "Not anymore. This is my home now. This is where I belong. This is my true family. The family that accepts me as I am. The family that helps me grow. If you truly love me, you will stay with me and let them guide you as they have guided me. If you can't do that, the door is open. You can leave whenever you want, but you will leave alone." I went to look for the car keys, but they weren't where I had left them. I looked for my phone, but I couldn't find it either. I went to the front desk to demand an explanation and found Aurelio waiting for me. "Objects from the outside world are distractions," he said with that soft voice that was already terrifying to me. "Here you don't need them. Here you have everything you need to heal." I demanded he return my things. I told him I was going to call the police. I told him they couldn't hold me against my will. Aurelio didn't flinch. "No one is holding you," he said. "You can leave whenever you want. The estate is 15 kilometers from the main road. If you want to walk, go ahead. But your wife stays. She is chosen." I spent the whole night thinking about what to do. I couldn't leave without Carmen. But Carmen was no longer Carmen. She was an empty version of the woman I loved. A puppet repeating Aurelio's phrases as if they were gospel truth. The next day I tried a different approach. I pretended to accept, that I wanted to participate, that I was willing to let myself be guided. I attended Aurelio's special session. What I saw in that room still haunts me every night when I close my eyes. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't anything that could be called healing. It was a ritual of systematic identity destruction. A process designed to erase everything a person had been and replace it with something new, something molded according to Aurelio's desires. The room was in the basement of the main building, a place they hadn't shown us during the initial tour. The walls were painted black, and the only light came from candles placed in a circle on the floor. In the center was a wooden chair, simple, unadorned like a throne of penitence. Aurelio sat each participant in that chair while the others formed a circle around them, so close you could feel their breath on your neck. Then the process began. They made them repeat phrases that denied everything they had been. "My name doesn't matter. My past was a lie. My only purpose is to serve true love." They repeated it over and over for hours, without rest, without water, without being able to move from the chair. If someone hesitated, if someone stopped, the entire circle started pressuring them, screaming the phrases at them until they repeated them correctly. Aurelio walked around the circle supervising everything, intervening when someone showed resistance, whispering words in their ear that I couldn't hear, but that seemed to break down their last defenses. I saw my wife sitting in that circle with her eyes completely empty, dull, lifeless. She repeated the phrases like an automaton, moving her lips without thinking about what she was saying, completely convinced she was healing when in reality she was being erased. Word by word, memory by memory. The woman I loved was disappearing before my eyes and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I left the room before it was my turn, before they sat me in that chair and started destroying everything I was. That night I stole the keys to one of the staff cars I had seen parked behind the maintenance building. I found Marcos hiding among the olive trees, as desperate as I was, with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands. His wife Patricia wasn't speaking to him at all anymore. When they crossed paths in the hallways, she looked at him as if he were a stranger, or worse, as if he were an obstacle that needed to be eliminated. She only repeated that he was toxic, that he had to purify himself or let her go, that Aurelio had shown her the truth, and she didn't plan to return to the lie she had lived in for 20 years. "We have to get help," I told him as we walked toward where I had hidden the car. "We can't get them out alone. They are too convinced, too lost. We need professionals, police, someone who knows how to deal with this." Marcos nodded without saying anything. I think in that moment he had already accepted that he might never see his wife as he knew her again. We drove for almost an hour on dirt roads until we reached the nearest town, a tiny place with barely 200 inhabitants sleeping at that hour of the morning. We found a bar that was still open and called the police from there. We told them everything we had seen, the questionnaires designed to extract compromising information, the emotional destruction exercises, the basement ritual with candles and phrases repeated to exhaustion, the transformation of our wives into people we no longer recognized. The officers looked at us with evident skepticism. It was clear they thought we were exaggerating, that maybe we had had a fight with our partners and were being dramatic. But they agreed to accompany us back to the estate to check that everything was in order. When we arrived, just before dawn, the place was completely empty. There was absolutely no one left. Not Aurelio with his snake voice. Not Esperanza with her maternal smile that now seemed like a demon's grimace to me. Not the converted participants looking at us as if we were enemies. Not Carmen. Just abandoned furniture covered in white sheets and the echo of our footsteps resonating in rooms that seemed to have been empty for years, not hours. It was as if everything we had lived through had been a dream, a shared hallucination that had vanished with the daylight. The police searched every corner of the estate but found nothing useful. No documents, no record of the participants, no clue as to where they might have gone. They investigated the organization's name, but it didn't exist in any official registry. The estate belonged to a shell company registered in a foreign country, a web of empty corporations designed to make it impossible to find the true owners. The reviews Carmen and I had read online before booking had disappeared as if they had never existed, wiped from all platforms without a trace. Carmen had vanished along with them, swallowed by nothingness, turned into a ghost. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, I haven't stopped looking for her for a single day. I have hired 2 different private detectives, one after the other, when the first gave up telling me it was impossible to find someone who didn't want to be found. I have contacted organizations specializing in rescuing victims of cults and psychological manipulation groups. I have spoken with psychologists who are experts in deprogramming, who have explained how difficult it is to recover someone who has been subjected to these types of techniques. I have tracked every clue, no matter how small, every rumor on internet forums, every sighting that could lead me to her. Marcos is also still looking for Patricia. We call each other every week to share the little we have discovered, to encourage each other, to remind ourselves that we are not crazy, that what we lived was real, even if it sometimes seems impossible. 3 days ago, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Carmen. The message said, "I have found the peace I always sought, the peace you could never give me. Do not look for me anymore. The man I knew no longer exists for me, and I no longer exist for him. The love we thought we had was an illusion, a mirage that prevented us from seeing the truth. Now I see clearly. Let go of the past, Sergio. It is best for both of us." I replied immediately with trembling fingers. I begged her to tell me where she was. I promised I wouldn't try to take her against her will if she didn't want to, that I just needed to see her one more time, talk to her for 5 minutes, make sure with my own eyes that she was okay and not in danger. She didn't answer, but the message gave me a clue she perhaps didn't intend to give me. I managed to access the file metadata, and it showed an approximate location, a rural mountain area 600 kilometers from here, near the border. Tomorrow I leave to look for her. I don't know what I will find when I arrive. I don't know if the woman I loved still exists somewhere inside the person they have turned her into, or if Carmen has disappeared forever, replaced by someone who wears her face but isn't her. I don't know if I will be able to bring her back, or if I will have to accept that I have lost her forever, that the love of my life has become a stranger who looks at me without recognizing me. But I cannot give up. Not yet. Not while there is a slight possibility left. because I remember how she looked at me before all this. I remember her contagious laugh that filled the room. I remember the way she crinkled her nose when she found something funny or absurd. I remember her hands always cold, seeking mine for warmth, even in summer. I remember the nights we stayed up talking until dawn about everything and nothing. I remember the woman who chose me 7 years ago at that wedding, the one who danced with me all night, the one who bet her life that we could be happy together. I remember Carmen, and as long as there is something of her left somewhere in the world, I will keep looking, even if it takes the rest of my life, even if it destroys me in the process, even if in the end I discover I arrived too late. Because that is what you do when you truly love someone. You don't give up, ever. My name is Rebecca. I am 35 years old, and 2 weeks ago I made the biggest mistake of my life. It all started when my marriage fell apart. 8 years of a relationship ended with a 15-minute conversation in the kitchen of our house. He told me he didn't love me anymore, that he had met someone else, that he was very sorry but couldn't keep pretending. I stood there looking at him, not knowing what to say, holding a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands while my life crumbled around me. The following weeks were hell. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and I couldn't focus on work. My boss gave me a few days off after finding me crying in the bathroom for the 3rd time in a week. My friends tried to help me, take me out to dinner, get me out of the house, force me to do normal things. But I just wanted to be alone. I wanted to understand what I had done wrong. I wanted to find some way to stop feeling that emptiness that devoured me from the inside every time I woke up in an empty bed. That was when I saw the ad. I was browsing the internet at 3 in the morning, as I did every night since he left, looking for anything to distract me from my insomnia. Then it appeared on my screen, as if the algorithm knew exactly what I needed. A spiritual retreat in the mountains, 7 days of meditation, yoga, and connection with nature. Disconnect from the world and reconnect with yourself, the slogan read. The photos showed wooden cabins surrounded by forest, people smiling with their eyes closed in meditation poses, golden sunrises over snowy peaks that looked like they were taken from a postcard. I am not one of those people who believe in spirituality, in the energy of the universe, in chakras or mantras. I had always quietly made fun of my friends who went on silent retreats or talked about their spiritual coaches. But I was desperate. I needed to get out of my apartment, out of my city, out of my life. I needed to go somewhere where no one knew me, where no one looked at me with pity, where I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning in my own memories. So I booked a spot without thinking too much about it. I paid the €600 for the full week, and 2 days later, I was driving up a mountain road toward a place called the Interior Renewal Center. The drive was longer than I expected. The last 2 hours were on an unpaved road that snaked through trees that grew denser and darker, as if the forest were closing in around me. My phone lost signal long before I arrived, which seemed normal given how remote the place was. When I finally saw the cabins appear among the pines, I felt a huge relief, although also a bit of unease that I couldn't identify. Something my instinct was trying to tell me, but I was too tired to listen. A woman met me at the entrance of the complex. Her name was Aurora. She was about 50 years old and had a smile that seemed permanently etched onto her face. She wore a white cotton tunic that reached her ankles, and her gray hair was pulled back in a thick braid that fell down her back to her waist. She welcomed me with a long hug, too long, lasting longer than I was comfortable with, and explained the rules of the retreat with a soft voice that sounded rehearsed. No cell phones, no watches, no contact with the outside world for 7 days. Schedules were marked by the sound of a bronze bell that hung next to the main building. Meals were in silence to encourage inner reflection. Meditation sessions were mandatory, 3 a day, and skipping any was forbidden. And most importantly, no one could leave the retreat before completing the full 7 days. These are the rules that guarantee transformation, Aurora said without stopping her smile for a single second. If you leave early, all the inner work will have been in vain. The process requires total commitment. I accepted without thinking too much. I handed over my phone, my watch, my car keys. I was so tired, so empty, so desperate to feel something other than constant pain that I would have accepted anything just to have a week of peace. They assigned me a small but cozy cabin at the north end of the complex, near the edge of the forest. It had a single bed with linen sheets, a nightstand, a wooden chair, and nothing else. No television, no radio, no books, no magazines. Just a thick white candle and a box of matches by the window. Aurora explained that electricity was used only in the common areas, and that in the individual cabins we relied on natural light during the day and candles at night to reconnect with the ancestral rhythms of nature, she said. Artificial light pollutes the soul and disconnects us from our true inner self. The first 2 days were exactly what I expected from a retreat of this type. Gentle yoga at sunrise on a wooden platform overlooking the valley. Guided meditation after breakfast in a circular room with cushions on the floor. Silent walks along forest paths where only the singing of birds and the crunch of leaves under our feet could be heard. More meditation before dinner. Vegetarian food that was surprisingly good. Fresh salads, vegetable soups, freshly baked bread. The other participants were normal people like me. People who had come looking for something missing in their lives. There was a 42-year-old executive with deep, dark circles under her eyes, who had suffered from anxiety problems for years. A 63-year-old university professor, who had just retired and didn't know what to do with all his free time. A young couple in their 20s who wanted to strengthen their relationship before getting married. A 60-year-old widower looking for inner peace after losing his wife. 4 other participants with similar stories of loss, stress, and the search for meaning. We were 12 in total, plus Aurora and 3 other guides who led us in the sessions. The guides also wore white tunics, and they all had that same permanent smile that at first seemed reassuring, even enviable. I thought they must have found some kind of peace that I didn't yet understand. But little by little that smile started to seem strange to me. Too fixed, too identical on all of them. As if it were a mask they wore instead of a genuine expression. On the 3rd day I started to notice things that didn't add up. At night, after the bell rang indicating bedtime, I heard chanting coming from the forest. They weren't normal songs, or religious hymns, or meditation mantras. They were guttural, repetitive sounds that rose and fell in intensity like waves breaking against a beach at night. Voices that intertwined, forming patterns that were hypnotic and disturbing in equal measure. When I asked Aurora during breakfast, she told me they were the guides practicing advanced breathing and vocalization techniques. It is part of their continuous training, she explained without losing her smile. These are very ancient practices that help connect with higher planes of consciousness. When you have been with us longer, when you have advanced enough on your path, you will be able to join the night sessions and experience it for yourself. I also noticed that the guides never slept, or at least I never saw them sleep. At any hour of the night that I left my cabin to go to the shared bathroom next to the main building, I found them awake. Sometimes walking silently among the trees, sometimes sitting motionless staring into the darkness of the forest with empty expressions, sometimes whispering among themselves in a language I didn't recognize. And there were the marks. On the 4th day, during a yoga session at sunrise, I saw that the executive with anxiety had marks on her wrists. At first I thought they were scars from self-harm, something I had unfortunately seen before in people with mental health issues. But when I looked closer, I saw they weren't cuts. They were symbols. Concentric circles with lines radiating outward like the rays of a black sun. They looked carved into the skin, not tattooed, as if someone had branded them with something hot. I asked her what they were when the session ended, and she smiled with that smile I was already starting to recognize and fear. "They are the marks of the first initiation," she said with a dreamy voice. "Aurora made them on me last night during a special ceremony. It hurts a little at first, but it is necessary to advance on the path. I can feel how they are helping me open up to the transformation." "What transformation?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound curious instead of alarmed. "The final transformation," she replied. "The purpose of all this. Aurora says I will understand everything soon. She says soon I will be free from all pain and suffering. She says soon I will be part of something bigger than myself." That night I tried to talk to the retired professor. He was the participant I had connected with most during the first few days. An intelligent man with a dry sense of humor, skeptical by nature, who at first had quietly made fun of some of the more esoteric practices of the retreat. We had exchanged knowing glances during the longer meditations and had interesting conversations during the walks in the forest. But when I found him after dinner, he was no longer the same man I had met. He had a vacant look, unfocused, as if he were seeing something I couldn't see. He spoke in short, repetitive sentences that sounded memorized. When I asked him if he had noticed anything strange about the retreat, he looked at me as if he didn't understand the question, as if the words coming out of my mouth made no sense. "Everything is fine," he said in a monotone voice. "Everything is exactly as it should be. Aurora takes care of us. Aurora guides us toward the light. Soon, we will be renewed. Soon, we will be free." I saw the marks on his wrists. The same concentric circles, the same rays radiating outward. That was when I decided to leave. I waited until everyone was asleep, or whatever it was they did at night, and left my cabin with the intention of getting to my car and driving back to civilization. I didn't care about my things, my clothes, my phone, or the money I had paid. I just wanted to get out of there before they did to me what they had done to the others. But my car wasn't where I had left it. The dirt parking lot where I had parked the first day was completely empty. The 12 vehicles that had brought the participants had disappeared without a trace. Only the center's white van remained, locked, parked next to the main building. I heard footsteps behind me and turned around with my heart pounding in my throat. It was Aurora. She was still smiling, but now her smile seemed completely different to me. It was no longer reassuring. It was the smile of a predator that has cornered its prey and knows there is no escape. "The cars are taken away on the third day," she said with a soft voice as if explaining something obvious. "It is part of the detachment process, eliminating material distractions, eliminating temptations to flee before completing the transformation. It is for your own good." "I want to leave," I said, trying to make my voice sound firm, although inside I was trembling. "No one leaves before the 7th day," Aurora replied, taking a step toward me. "It is the fundamental rule. It is what you signed when you made the reservation. It is the commitment you made. I didn't sign anything saying you would take my car," I said, stepping back. Aurora stepped closer until I could smell her breath. She smelled of bitter herbs, of burnt incense, of something sweet and rotting that I couldn't identify. "You signed a commitment of total transformation," she whispered. "And transformation requires sacrifice. It requires absolute surrender. It requires complete trust in the process and in those who guide you." She grabbed my arm with a strength I didn't expect from a woman of her age, fingers digging into my flesh like claws, and took me back to my cabin without me being able to resist. "Rest," she said, pushing me inside and locking the door from the outside. "Tomorrow the second phase of the process begins. Tomorrow you will start to understand why you are really here." I tried to open the door, but it was locked with some kind of exterior bolt. I tried to open the window, but discovered it was nailed to the frame with thick nails. I screamed for help until I was hoarse, but no one came. Or maybe they came and just stood outside listening, waiting for me to get tired. I spent the entire night awake, huddled in a corner of the cabin, listening to the chants coming from the forest, louder than ever, wondering what was going to happen when the sun came up. The next day, 2 guides took me out of the cabin and brought me to what Aurora called the purification ceremony. They gathered all of us participants in a clearing in the forest, where they had built a sort of circular altar with black stones piled in the center. The guides no longer wore white tunics, but tunics black as night, and their faces were painted with the same symbols I had seen on the wrists of the initiates, circles and lines forming hypnotic patterns. I saw that most of the participants already had the marks carved into their skin. The retired professor, the young couple who had come to strengthen their relationship, the widower, the executive, almost everyone. And they all smiled with that empty and beatific smile that was already more terrifying to me than any gesture of threat. Aurora stood in front of the altar and began to speak with a voice that resonated in the clearing, as if coming from everywhere at once. She spoke of renewal and transformation, of leaving behind the old corrupt self to be reborn as something new, something better, something purer and perfect. She spoke of an ancient being that dwelt in the depths of the mountains since before humans walked the earth, a being that had been asleep for millennia, patiently waiting for enough souls to gather in this sacred place to wake it from its eternal slumber. She spoke of the final transformation, The glorious moment when we would all merge with that ancestral being and reach an existence beyond human pain, beyond mundane suffering, beyond death itself. And she spoke of the seventh day. The seventh day is when everything culminates, she said with a voice trembling with ecstasy. The seventh day is when the Ancient One wakes from his long sleep and claims us as his own. The seventh day is when we cease to be separate individuals and become part of something eternal and infinite. I looked around looking for allies, looking for someone who shared my terror, someone with whom I could plan an escape. But almost all the faces I saw were serene, empty, completely surrendered to Aurora's words like children listening to a bedtime story. Almost all. The executive with anxiety was looking at me from the other side of the circle, and in her eyes I saw something I recognized immediately. Fear, sheer terror. The same terror I felt. The marks on her wrists shone under the sunlight, but her expression was not one of peace or acceptance. It was the expression of someone who has realized too late that they have made a terrible mistake from which there may be no turning back. That night I managed to talk to her, taking advantage of a moment when the guides were distracted. Her name was Marta, and she had arrived at the retreat 3 days before me, seeking relief for her chronic anxiety. At first everything had seemed normal to her, even beneficial. Yoga relaxed her. Meditation calmed her mind. The food was good and the surroundings were beautiful. But after the first initiation, something had changed inside her. She had strange dreams every night, dreams where she walked through endless tunnels toward a light that was not light. She heard voices when she was alone, whispers coming from nowhere and everywhere. And worst of all, sometimes she lost control of her own body, moments when she felt something else moving through her, using her hands and her legs and her voice without her permission. The marks are a door, she told me with a trembling voice while we watched to make sure no one approached. They let something in. I don't know exactly what it is, but I can feel it growing inside me every day, feeding on me. Every day it is stronger, and every day I am weaker, more tired, more lost. We have to escape, I said. I have tried, Marta replied with tears in her eyes. I have tried to flee 3 times since they made the marks on me. But they always find me. They always bring me back before I get anywhere. And every time I try, the voices become louder, more insistent, harder to ignore. What do the voices say? I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Marta stared at me for several seconds before answering. They say soon I will be free, she whispered. That soon I will stop suffering. That soon I will be part of something bigger and more beautiful than myself. And the worst part is that a part of me wants to believe them. A part of me wants to give up and let whatever has to happen happen because I am so tired of fighting. We spent that night planning our escape in whispers while pretending to sleep. Marta had explored the surroundings during her previous escape attempts. She knew there was a narrow path leading east, away from the main road, but eventually connecting with another secondary road about 10 kilometers away. If we managed to get there before dawn, we could ask a passing driver for help. We waited until 3 in the morning, when the forest chants reached their most intense point and the guides were busy with whatever they did during their nocturnal rituals. We climbed out the window of my cabin, which Marta had managed to loosen by prying out the nails during the previous day while pretending to rest, and ran into the forest without looking back. I don't know how long we ran. The forest was dense and dark and we had no light to guide us. We tripped over roots, scratched ourselves on branches that seemed to reach out to us like fingers, breathed the cold mountain air while our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. And then, Marta stopped dead. I turned to see what was wrong and found her standing in the middle of the path, completely motionless, with her arms hanging at her sides like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Marta, I said, grabbing her arm. Let's go. We have to keep going. We're almost there. But she didn't move. She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring into the darkness of the forest with an empty expression that froze my blood. They are coming, she finally said with a voice that was not hers, a deep and ancient voice that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. They are coming to find us. They are coming to take us home. I saw lights among the trees, torches approaching from all directions, and I heard voices, many voices, all chanting in unison those guttural words I had heard every night since arriving at the retreat. I ran. I left Marta behind and ran like I had never run in my life. I didn't look back. I didn't think about anything other than putting one foot in front of the other, getting away from those lights, from those voices, from everything I had seen and heard in that place. I don't know how I reached the road. I don't know how many hours I walked after my legs could no longer run. I only know that when the sun began to rise, I was stumbling along the shoulder of a secondary road, barefoot, with my clothes in tatters, shaking from cold and terror and exhaustion. A truck driver picked me up and took me to the nearest town. From there I called the police and told them everything I had seen. They looked at me like I was crazy. They went to the place I indicated but found nothing. No cabins, no altar, no participants, no guides. Just an empty clearing in the forest where it looked like someone had camped a long time ago. No trace of the interior renewal center. The retreat does not exist, the officer told me. There is no record. The website is gone, the phone doesn't work. But I was there, I insisted. They recommended I talk to a professional. That was 2 weeks ago. Now I am in my apartment trying to resume my normal life. I have gone back to work, although I struggle to concentrate. I have seen my friends again, although their conversations seem distant to me, as if they were speaking from the other side of a thick glass. I have tried to convince myself that it was all a bad dream, a hallucination caused by the stress of the divorce, by the weeks without sleep, by the desperation that led me to look for solutions in places where I shouldn't have looked. But there are things I cannot explain no matter how hard I try. There are the nightmares I have every night without exception. Dreams where I walk through dark tunnels towards something that calls me with a voice that has no words. Dreams where I hear the chants and see the torches approaching through the trees. Dreams where Aurora smiles at me and tells me that soon I will be home. There are the voices I hear when I'm alone in the apartment. Whispers coming from the walls, from the ceiling, from somewhere inside my own head. Voices that tell me not to be afraid, that everything is going to be okay, that soon I will stop suffering. And there are the marks. I found them this morning while I was showering. Concentric circles with lines radiating outward like the rays of a black sun. On my left wrist. Exactly the same as the ones I saw on Marta and on the professor and on everyone else. I don't remember when they made them on me. I don't remember feeling pain. But they are there, carved into my skin as if they had always been there. And when I touch them, I feel something moving inside me. Something that grows a little more every day that passes. Something that whispers with the same voices I hear at night. And the worst part is that a part of me wants to listen to them. A part of me wants to go back to the mountain and find Aurora and ask her to complete what she started. A part of me wants to stop fighting and surrender to whatever is growing inside me because I'm so tired of resisting. But another part, the part that is still me, the part that remembers who I was before all this, knows I cannot do that. So I keep fighting. I keep resisting. I keep trying to convince myself that I can win this battle even though every day it gets harder. Even though every day the voices are louder and more persuasive. Even though every day the marks seem to spread a little more across my skin. Even though every day I feel there is less of me and more of what they put inside. I don't know how long I can keep going like this. I don't know if there is any way to stop what is happening. I only know that the 7th day is coming. And when it comes, I do not know if there will be anything left of me to tell the tale. My name is Lucia. I am 34 years old, and 2 months ago I left my son in the hands of something I do not understand. I am a night shift nurse at a public hospital. I work from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, 5 days a week. Sometimes 6 when I have to cover sick leaves. It is exhausting, but it is the only shift I could get when I went back to work after Marcos, my son's father, abandoned us without warning. He went out to buy cigarettes one afternoon in March and never came back. He left a note saying that he was not ready to be a father, that he needed to find himself, and that someday I would understand. I did not understand it. I still do not understand it 3 years later. My son Nico was 2 years old when his father disappeared. Now he is 5 and barely remembers him. He is a quiet boy, perhaps too quiet for his age, with his father's dark eyes and my impossible-to-comb brown hair. He likes dinosaurs, dog drawings, and falling asleep hugging a stuffed giraffe my mother gave him before she died. During the first 2 years after Marcos left, my mother helped me with Nico at night. She took care of him while I worked, and I took care of him during the day while she rested. It worked. It was difficult, but it worked. But my mother died 6 months ago of a heart attack that nobody saw coming. One day she was playing with Nico in the park, and the next day she was in a wooden box descending into a hole in the ground. Suddenly, I was alone, completely alone with a 5-year-old boy and a job that forced me to be away from home all night. I tried to change shifts, but there were no openings available. I tried to find a night nanny, but nobody wanted to work those hours, and the few who accepted charged more than I earned. I tried asking social services for help, but they told me I did not meet the requirements for any benefits. I was desperate. That was when I saw the poster. It was stuck to the street lamp next to the bus stop I used every night to go to the hospital. The Little Dreamers Night Daycare. Childcare from 10 at night to 7 in the morning. Prices adapted to each family. Safe and loving environment. There was a phone number and an address in a neighborhood I did not know well, in the old part of the city. I called the next day without much hope. A woman with a soft and warm voice answered and introduced herself as Mrs. Amparo. I explained my situation to her through tears I could not hold back, telling her I was a single mother on the night shift, with no family and no options. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished she told me not to worry, that her daycare existed exactly for that, to help mothers like me whom the system had forgotten. She gave me an appointment for that same afternoon. The daycare was in the basement of an old building on a narrow street in the historic district. From the outside, it did not look like anything special, just a blue painted wooden door with a small sign that said the name of the place. But when I went down the stairs and walked in, I was surprised by how cozy it was. There were walls painted with murals of stars and moons, thick rugs on the floor, small beds lined up against the walls, and shelves full of toys and storybooks. Mrs. Amparo was a woman in her 70s, short and plump, with white hair gathered in a bun and a floral apron that smelled of lavender. She had the most reassuring smile I had ever seen in my life, the kind of smile grandmothers have in cookie commercials. She showed me the facilities while explaining her philosophy. She said children needed to feel safe to sleep well. That was why they created an environment of absolute calm, with strict routines and a lot of affection. The little ones arrived, had a light dinner, did quiet activities until they felt sleepy, and then slept peacefully until their parents came to pick them up in the morning. I asked her about the price, and she told me a figure so low I thought I had misheard. When I asked her to repeat it, she smiled and told me it was not a business, but a calling. She said she had raised 7 children, and now that they were all gone, she needed to keep caring for children, because it was the only thing she knew how to do. That same night I took Nico for the first time. He was nervous, clinging to my leg, looking around with those dark eyes that saw more than he said. But Mrs. Amparo kneeled in front of him, spoke to him in whispers, and showed him a stuffed dinosaur she had ready. In less than 5 minutes, Nico was playing on the rug as if he had been going there his whole life. I went to work with a heavy heart, but also with a relief I had not felt in months. When I picked him up at 7 in the morning, Nico was asleep in one of the little beds, wrapped in a soft blanket, with an expression of absolute peace. Mrs. Amparo told me he had been an angel, that he had eaten well and that he had fallen asleep without problems. She handed him to me in her arms and wished me a good rest. The first few weeks were perfect. Nico adapted to the daycare better than I expected. Every night he ran in to hug Mrs. Amparo, and every morning they returned him to me asleep and calm. He started sleeping better even on the days he did not go to the daycare. He ate better. He had fewer tantrums. My co-workers at the hospital told me I looked like a different person, that I looked rested, that I had gotten the color back in my cheeks. For the first time since Marcos left, I felt that maybe I could handle this, that maybe being a single mother was not the death sentence I had believed. It was in the 4th week when I started noticing strange things. One day I picked up Nico and he had a drawing in his hand. He showed it to me proudly and told me he had made it for me. It was a black circle with lines coming out of it like a sun but dark, and around it there were small figures that looked like kneeling people. I asked him what it was and he told me it was the friend who lived underneath. I thought it was childhood imagination. Children invent imaginary friends constantly. It is a normal part of development. I told him it was a very beautiful drawing and put it in my purse without giving it more importance. But the drawings kept appearing. Every morning Nico brought a new one. The same black circle with the lines, the same kneeling figures. Sometimes he added details like stairs going down into the darkness, doors leading nowhere, or children with closed eyes floating in the air. I asked Mrs. Amparo if she knew anything about those drawings, and she smiled with that reassuring smile of hers and told me that children had a lot of imagination, that it was normal for them to invent stories, and that I should not worry about anything. But I was starting to worry. Nico had changed in subtle ways I did not know how to explain. He was still quiet, but now he was too quiet, as if he were always listening to something I could not hear, a frequency only he picked up. Sometimes I found him staring at a wall for entire minutes, with his eyes unfocused and his lips moving as if he were talking to someone invisible. When I asked him what he was doing, he told me he was talking to the friend, that the friend told him secrets about the things underneath. He had also stopped playing with his plastic dinosaurs, the ones he used to take everywhere. Now he only wanted to draw, always the same drawing, for hours without getting tired. And he started saying things that made no sense. One night, while I was dressing him to take him to daycare, he looked at me with those dark eyes that no longer shone like before, and told me that Mrs. Amparo was not her real name. He said her real name was very long and had sounds that normal people could not make with their mouths. I asked him who had told him that, and he answered that the friend did. That the friend knew the real names of everyone, of all things, of everything that existed and what had existed before. Another night he told me that under the daycare there was a very long staircase that went down and down to where the friend lived. He said that sometimes the children who behaved very well could go down that staircase and see the friend in person. He said he wanted to go down more than anything in the world, but he had not behaved well enough yet. He said he was trying very hard so the friend would choose him. When I asked him what happened when the children went down the stairs, he smiled at me with a smile that did not seem like his own, and told me that then they were happy forever, that they no longer had to worry about anything, that the friend took care of them and loved them more than anyone had ever loved them. That was the first night I could not sleep. I started having nightmares. I dreamed of my son going down an endless staircase into a darkness that beat like a heart. I dreamed of black circles spinning slowly while voices whispered words I could not understand. I dreamed of Mrs. Amparo smiling at me with a mouth full of teeth that were not teeth. I decided to investigate. One night I told my supervisor I was sick, and instead of going to the hospital, I went to the daycare. I hid in a nearby doorway and waited. At 10 at night I saw several parents arrive with their children, exhausted mothers in cleaning uniforms, fathers in work overalls, people like me who had no other option. They dropped off the children and rushed to their night jobs. At 11 the street was empty and the basement lights went out. I waited another hour and then approached the door. It was locked, but I found a small window at ground level that looked into the basement. It was covered by a curtain, but there was a gap through which I could see inside. What I saw left me paralyzed. The daycare was completely dark, except for some candles placed in a circle in the center of the room. There must have been 30 or 40 candles, small and black, with flames burning in a color that was neither orange nor yellow, but something between blue and purple, a color that should not exist in normal fire. The children were sitting on the floor inside the candle circle, forming another smaller circle. I counted 8, maybe 10, all looking towards the same point in the center, all with their eyes closed and their lips moving in unison as if reciting something, as if they were praying in a language that was not human. In the center of the children's circle was Mrs. Amparo, but it was not the Mrs. Amparo I knew, the little grandmother with a floral apron who smelled of lavender. This Mrs. Amparo was on her knees with her arms raised towards the ceiling, her head thrown back, swaying back and forth with a mechanical and repetitive movement. From her mouth came a deep and continuous sound that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside her body. A buzz I could feel vibrating in my own bones, even though I was on the other side of the glass. Her floral apron was gone. She wore a black robe that covered her entire body, and on her chest was embroidered the same symbol Nico drew constantly, a black circle with lines radiating outward. And there was something else. On the floor, right under where Mrs. Amparo was kneeling, there was an open trapdoor. An old and rotten wooden trapdoor that led to stone stairs descending into a darkness so absolute it seemed solid, as if you could touch it with your hands and feel its texture against your skin. Something was coming out of that darkness. I do not know how to describe it because I have no words for what I saw. It was not exactly light. It was rather an absence of light that moved, that had a shape, that had a will. It reached up from the hole like tentacles made of nothing, of pure emptiness, of the denial of everything that exists. And the tentacles moved with a horrible grace, searching, feeling around, until they found the children. Then, they touched them. They caressed their heads with a delicacy that was obscene. They coiled around their small bodies like shadow snakes. And the children did not move. They did not cry. They did not try to flee. They kept reciting with their eyes closed and their mouths open, while those things wrapped around them as if they were gifts someone was unwrapping very slowly. I saw my son among them. I saw Nico sitting with the other children, with his eyes closed, with his lips moving to the rhythm of the collective litany, with one of those tentacles of darkness caressing his hair with the same tenderness with which I caressed him when I put him to bed at night. And on my son's face there was an expression of absolute peace, of complete happiness, as if he were exactly where he wanted to be, as if he had finally found his place in the world. I wanted to scream, but my voice would not come out. I wanted to run inside and get him out of there, but my body did not respond. I stood paralyzed looking through that window while something that should not exist touched my son and the other children with a tenderness that was more terrifying than any violence. Then Mrs. Amparo turned her head towards the window. She saw me, and she smiled. I do not know how I got home. I do not remember the way. I do not remember opening the door. I do not remember anything until I found myself sitting on the couch shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. I waited until 7 in the morning and went to pick up Nico. Mrs. Amparo greeted me with her usual smile, with her floral apron that smelled of lavender, with that maternal warmth I could no longer look at without feeling nauseous. She handed Nico to me asleep in her arms and told me he had had a very quiet night. I said nothing. I could not say anything. I just took my son and left. That afternoon I called the police. I told them what I had seen. I gave them the address. I begged them to go investigate. They told me they would send someone. 2 hours later they called to tell me they had visited the address and there was no daycare there. Only an empty basement that had been abandoned for years. No beds, no toys, no children, no Mrs. Amparo, nothing. I told them it was impossible, that I had left my son there dozens of times, that there were other parents who could confirm my story. I gave them detailed descriptions of mothers in hotel cleaning uniforms, fathers in factory overalls, people from my neighborhood, people who worked at night just like me. They asked me if I was taking any medication. They asked me if I had slept well lately. They asked me if I had a history of mental health problems in my family. They suggested with a condescending voice that maybe the stress of being a single mother was affecting me more than I thought. That maybe I needed to talk to someone, a professional who could help me. I begged them to believe me. I begged them to at least investigate. I told them there were children in danger, that something was happening in that daycare that I could not explain, but that was real as they and I were. They looked at me with pity and told me to rest. I went to the address myself the next day, in broad daylight, holding Nico by the hand because I did not dare leave him alone for a minute. The basement was empty, exactly as the police had said. Bare brick walls covered in dampness and mold stains, cracked cement floor full of rubble, thick cobwebs in the corners suggesting years of abandonment. There was no sign that there had ever been a daycare there. No trace of the star and moon murals, no footprint of the thick rugs or the little beds lined up against the walls. It smelled musty, damp, forgotten. Not like lavender, not like freshly baked cookies, not like the warmth I'd felt every night for weeks. But in the center of the floor, half hidden under a layer of dust and rubble, there was a trapdoor. The same old and rotten wooden trapdoor I had seen open the night before. It was closed, but I could see the marks in the dust around it. As if someone had opened it recently. As if something had come out of there and left trails dragging itself to the surface. Nico pulled on my hand and told me he wanted to go down to see the friend. He said the friend was waiting below. He said the friend wanted to meet me too. I dragged him out of there while he cried and screamed that he wanted to stay, that he wanted to go down the stairs. that the friend needed him. I did not dare open the trapdoor. I do not know if it was out of cowardice or survival instinct. Maybe both. I looked for the other parents I had seen dropping off their children there. I went to the places where they worked and asked for them by name and description. Nobody knew them. Nobody had heard of them. It was as if they had never existed. I looked for the poster I had seen on the street lamp next to the bus stop. It was not there. And when I asked the neighbors in the area, nobody remembered seeing any daycare poster. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I have not taken Nico anywhere that is not absolutely necessary. I requested a leave of absence from work claiming serious family problems, using the few savings I had left to survive. We barely leave the house. I have put extra deadbolts on all the doors and windows. I sleep with him in my bed, hugging him all night, waking up every hour to make sure he is still there, that he has not gotten up, that he has not found a way out. I have contacted child psychologists trying to find a rational explanation for what is happening to my son. They have told me that children sometimes develop elaborate imaginary friends, that it is normal, that I should not worry. But none have been able to explain the drawings, nor the words and languages that do not exist, nor the way Nico looks into the shadows as if he can see something I cannot see. I have searched the internet for stories similar to mine. I have found forums where other mothers talk about daycares that appear and disappear, about children who change after spending nights in places nobody can find later. Some stories are so similar to mine they cannot be a coincidence. The same type of elderly caregivers with overly kind smiles, the same impossibly low prices, the same drawings of black circles, the same stairs going down into the darkness. But nobody has answers, only questions, only fear, only the horrible certainty that there is something out there feeding on the children of the desperate. But Nico has changed. He no longer talks about the friend, at least not directly, not with words I can hear. But sometimes I find him looking at a dark corner of the room with a smile that is not the smile of a 5-year-old boy, an old ancient smile that seems to know things no child should know. Sometimes I hear him whispering words in his sleep that do not belong to any language I know, syllables that coil in the air like smoke and leave a metallic taste in my mouth when I hear them. Sometimes when I hug him at night, I feel his skin is colder than it should be, as if something inside him were absorbing his body heat, feeding on him drop by drop. He no longer plays. He no longer laughs. He no longer asks to watch cartoons or eat ice cream or go to the park to see the ducks. He only wants to draw and look into the darkness and wait. Wait for the moment to go down the stairs. And the drawings continue. He no longer makes them at daycare because he no longer goes to daycare. But he finds a way to keep creating them, as if it were a compulsion he cannot control. He draws with his fingers on the fog of the windows when it is cold. He draws with little sticks in the dirt at the park the few times I take him. He draws with ketchup on his dinner plate, dragging his finger through the red sauce to form the pattern he knows by heart. Always the same black circle, always the same lines radiating outward like the rays of a dead sun. Always the same kneeling figures around it, more figures every time, smaller every time, as if the circle were growing and needed more worshippers. Last night I woke up with the feeling that something was wrong. Nico was not in bed. I looked for him all over the apartment with my heart in my throat, turning on all the lights, shouting his name. I found him standing in front of the front door, in his pajamas, barefoot, with his hand on the doorknob, trying to open it with a calm that terrified me more than any crying. I asked him where he was going, and he looked at me with those dark eyes that no longer seem like my son's eyes. Eyes that have seen things no child should see. Eyes that look right through me towards something very far away, or very deep. "The friend is calling me," he said with a serene voice. "He says it is time to go down the stairs. He says I have behaved very well, and I can go with him now. He says you can come too if you want, Mom. He says there is room for both of us." I picked him up in my arms while he kept repeating that the friend loved us, that the friend was waiting for us, that the friend would give us everything we needed if we only went down the stairs with him. I locked the door with all the deadbolts and hid the keys in the highest place I could find, a place where his small hands could not reach. But I know it will not be enough, because every night I hear him get up. Every night I find him in a different part of the apartment, always near a door, always near a window, always trying to find a way out. And every night he is closer to succeeding. And the worst part is that sometimes on the darkest nights, When the silence is so dense it seems to have weight and texture. I also hear something. A whisper coming from under the floor. A voice saying my name with a tenderness that makes my blood run cold. With the same tone my mother used when she sang me to sleep. With the same warmth Marcos's voice had before he became a stranger and disappeared. An invitation to go down the stairs and see what my son has seen. To understand what my son understands. To stop fighting and accept that there are things in this world that are bigger and older than us. I do not know how long I will be able to resist. I do not know how long I will be able to keep Nico safe from something that is already inside him, that is already part of him, that maybe was always part of him and was just waiting for someone to wake it up. I only know that every night is harder, that every day my son looks less like the boy he was, and that the darkness I saw coming out of that trapdoor is still there, somewhere under the city, under all the cities, waiting patiently for us to finish going down the stairs we have already begun to descend without knowing it. And sometimes when I look at Nico's drawings, I wonder if the kneeling figures around the black circle are us, all the desperate parents who leave our children in the hands of something we do not understand. All of us who thought we had found a solution when we had only found a trap. All of us who now hear the whisper in the dark and feel deep inside us, in that place where we keep the secrets we dare not confess, the urge to answer, the urge to go down. My name is Vicente. I am 45 years old, and I no longer know how many parts of me are still mine. I always had a phobia of the dentist, since I was a child, since that first time my mother took me to a clinic that smelled of disinfectant and metal, where a man in a white coat opened my mouth with cold instruments and hurt me in a way I still remember 38 years later. I left there crying and swore I would never go back, and I kept that promise for decades. I avoided checkups, ignored the discomfort, and got used to chewing only on one side when a tooth started to ache. My wife scolded me constantly, saying it was irresponsible and that I would end up losing all my teeth because I was a coward. But she did not understand. Nobody understood that irrational terror that paralyzed me every time I thought about lying in a chair, while someone with sharp tools poked around inside my mouth. 8 months ago, the pain became unbearable. It started as a mild discomfort in a lower molar, something I could ignore with ibuprofen and willpower, but it kept growing and spreading until it became a constant throbbing that did not let me sleep or eat or think about anything else. One Sunday night, I found myself crying in the bathroom, with a swollen face and a high fever, unable to stand it for another minute. My wife Elena took me to the emergency room. The doctor on duty told me I had a severe abscess that required immediate treatment. He prescribed antibiotics and told me to find a dentist first thing the next day, because otherwise the infection could spread and become something much worse. I spent that night looking for dentists on the internet, paralyzed between physical pain and psychological terror. Every page I opened showed me images of instruments, of open mouths, and of procedures that made me break out in a cold sweat. I was about to give up when I found an ad that seemed different. Serene Smile Dental Clinic. Specialists in patients with dental phobia. Guaranteed painless treatments. First consultation free. Deep relaxation techniques. Tell us about your fears, and we will make them disappear. There was something about the way it was written that I found comforting. They did not promise technological wonders or aggressive sedation. They promised to understand the fear and make it disappear. It was exactly what I needed. I called first thing in the morning. A soft and slow female voice answered and made me feel immediately comfortable. I explained my situation to her through stammers, mentioning the pain, the fear, and the years of avoiding any treatment. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me not to worry, that they had helped hundreds of patients like me, and that when I left their clinic, I would wonder why I had been so afraid for so many years. They gave me an appointment for that same afternoon. The clinic was in an old downtown building on a quiet street I did not remember seeing before, even though I had lived in the city all my life. The facade was discreet, just a gold plaque next to the door with the name of the place. Inside it smelled of lavender instead of the typical disinfectant smell I associated with my childhood trauma. A young receptionist welcomed me with a wide smile that showed perfect, incredibly white teeth. Almost too perfect to be natural. She had me fill out some forms and then guided me to a waiting room decorated with warm colors, soft music, and paintings of relaxing landscapes. There were no other patients waiting, only me. Dr. Mendoza appeared 10 minutes later. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses, dressed in an immaculate white coat. He had the softest hands I had ever seen, hands that seemed incapable of hurting anyone. He invited me into his office while speaking to me in a calm voice about my medical history, my fears, and the traumatic experiences that had led me to avoid the dentist for so long. He listened to me with an attention no doctor had ever given me, nodding and asking questions that showed he understood exactly how I felt. Before examining me, he told me he was going to do something different. He asked me to close my eyes while he spoke, to focus on his voice, and to let my muscles relax one by one, starting from my feet and going up to my head. I do not know how much time passed, but when I opened my eyes, I felt calmer than I had felt in years. The examination was surprisingly easy. Dr. Mendoza moved with a delicacy that made me barely feel his instruments. He explained everything he saw, showed me x-rays on a screen, and talked about the problems accumulated over decades of neglect. I had deep cavities, teeth that needed root canals, molars that had to be extracted, and swollen gums. It was a disaster. I knew it. But instead of feeling panic, I felt something akin to relief. I was finally going to fix it. Dr. Mendoza proposed a treatment plan. It would take several sessions over the next few months, but he promised me none would be painful. He said they had special techniques, methods they had developed over years of working with phobic patients. He assured me I would not feel anything, only improvement. The price was surprisingly low, much lower than what I had seen in other clinics during my terror-filled nighttime searches. I asked him how it was possible, and he smiled with that kind smile I was already starting to associate with tranquility. He said they believed in doing good, and that money was secondary to them. He added that the important thing was for their patients to recover their smile and their confidence. I signed the consent form for the treatment without reading it too closely. I was so relieved to have found a solution, and so desperate to end the pain that I did not pay attention to the fine print. The first session was a success. I lay down in the chair. Dr. Mendoza spoke to me with that soft voice that put me into a state of deep relaxation. And when I woke up, everything was over. They had extracted the infected molar, cleaned the abscess, and given me stitches. And I remembered nothing. Absolutely nothing. The pain was gone. For the first time in weeks, I could think clearly. I told Elena I had found the perfect dentist, that all my fears had been absurd, and that I was going to fix all the problems I had accumulated over years of cowardice. The following sessions were the same. I would arrive at the clinic with my stomach tied in knots from a fear that was no longer as intense as before. I would lie down in the reclining chair that smelled of leather and something sweet I could not identify. Dr. Mendoza would speak with that voice that seemed to wrap around me like a warm blanket, and I would enter that state of deep relaxation that was more like floating in warm water than sleeping. When I opened my eyes, everything was over. My mouth tasted of metal and something else, something organic I could not name, but that was already starting to seem familiar. There was no pain, no fear, no memories of the procedure. At first it seemed wonderful. After each session, I left the clinic feeling lighter, as if a weight I did not know I was carrying had been lifted off me. Food tasted better. I slept more soundly. Elena told me I looked younger, more relaxed, and more myself than I had been in years. And my mouth was transforming. Every session they took away something old and damaged and put in something new and perfect. The teeth that had suffered decades of neglect were being replaced by bright, white, flawless ones. When I looked in the mirror, I almost did not recognize my own smile. But I thought it was normal, that it was part of the healing process, and that I was becoming an improved version of myself. But during the fourth session, I started noticing strange things. I woke up with my mouth full of a metallic taste that was not blood. It was something different, something that vaguely reminded me of copper, but also of something organic and alive, as if I had chewed wet dirt or rotten roots that were still twisting. I rinsed my mouth over and over, but the taste persisted, permeating everything I ate and everything I drank for days and days, until I had almost gotten used to it as if it were part of me. I also noticed I was having trouble remembering things. Small things at first. Details I should have remembered effortlessly. The name of a co-worker named Esteban whom I had sat next to for 10 years, sharing coffees and complaints about the bosses. My sister Alicia's birthday, which had always been the 15th of August until suddenly I no longer knew if it was August or September, or if I even had a sister. My son Daniel's favorite movie, that animated one about robots we had watched together so many times we could recite the dialogue from memory. Details that should be burned into my memory suddenly seemed blurry, like photographs exposed to the sun for too long. I mentioned the memory issue to Dr. Mendoza during my next visit. Sitting in his office before going into the examination room, he nodded with that understanding expression he always had, with those kind eyes behind his gold glasses, and explained that it was a temporary side effect of the relaxation techniques they used. He crossed his hands on the desk with the calm of someone who has given that explanation hundreds of times, and said the brain sometimes needs to make room to process new experiences. He compared it to reorganizing a closet full of old things to make room for new clothes. He assured me the memories would return soon, when the healing process was further along. They did not return. In fact, every session I lost more. After the 5th session, I forgot how I had met Elena. I knew she was my wife. I knew we had been together for 20 years, and I knew I loved her with an intensity that had not faded over time. But the specific moment we saw each other for the first time had disappeared from my mind, leaving only a dark and cold hole where a precious memory should be. A story that defined us as a couple. I tried to piece it together. I remembered it was in college. I remembered there was a book. And I remembered she had laughed at something I had said. But the details slipped like water through my fingers every time I tried to catch them. After the 6th session, I forgot my mother's name. I was having dinner with Elena and Daniel when I wanted to mention something about her, an anecdote from my childhood, and suddenly I went blank. The word that should have been her name did not exist in my vocabulary. I had to call my sister Alicia to ask her, pretending it was an absurd joke, dying of embarrassment and fear inside while she told me her name was Carmen, as it had always been. Carmen. The name meant nothing to me. It was like hearing the name of a stranger. And then I started noticing the physical changes. One night, while I was brushing my teeth before going to sleep, I saw something in the mirror that made my blood run cold. My teeth were not my teeth. The ones they had put in as implants, the ones that had replaced the extracted molars, did not look normal. They were too white, with a shine that was not natural, and when I touched them with my tongue, I felt textures that should not be there. Edges that were too sharp, surfaces that seemed to move slightly under pressure. I tried to look closer, but when I opened my mouth in front of the mirror, I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to pull away. That night I dreamed of teeth. Teeth growing in places they should not grow, on the palms of my hands, on the soles of my feet, on the inside of my eyelids. Teeth sprouting from the ground like monstrous flowers in a nightmare garden. Teeth whispering words I did not understand but that resonated somewhere deep in my brain, in some primitive part that existed before language and before thought. Teeth that hungered for something I could not name but knew I had inside, something they had started devouring since the 1st session. In the dream, I was walking down an endless hallway made entirely of teeth. The walls were teeth. The floor was teeth. The ceiling was teeth. And at the end of the hallway there was a door. And I knew that behind that door was what the teeth served, what the teeth fed, what the teeth worshipped. And although terror paralyzed me, my feet kept moving towards the door, step by step, tooth by tooth. I woke up screaming and Elena asked me what was wrong, what I had dreamed, and if I was okay. I tried to tell her about the mirror, about the teeth that did not seem mine, about the dream of the endless hallway. But when I opened my mouth to explain it, I discovered I could not. The words would not come out. It was as if something inside me prevented me from talking about it, as if there were a physical barrier between my brain and my tongue, blocking any attempt to confess what was happening. Every time I tried to form the words, the new teeth sent a sharp stab of pain that made me stay quiet. I went to the clinic the next day without an appointment. The receptionist looked at me with that perfect smile, that smile of incredibly white teeth that now seemed like a threat instead of a welcome, and told me Dr. Mendoza was with a patient, but would see me as soon as he could. I sat in the waiting room, and for the first time I noticed details I had previously overlooked, details my mind had ignored, or that perhaps the new teeth had prevented me from seeing until now. The paintings on the walls were not relaxing landscapes. When I looked at them directly, they appeared to be snowy mountains, beaches at sunset, or autumn forests. But when I looked away and saw them out of the corner of my eye, they showed something completely different. There were kneeling figures around something that had no defined shape, something dark and pulsating that occupied the center of each image. There were open mouths and expressions that could be ecstasy or agony, impossible to know which. And teeth. Teeth everywhere. Teeth forming patterns, growing from the dirt like monstrous flowers, raining from the sky like a biblical plague. The soft background music was not music. Now that I was paying attention, I could hear what it really was. Voices. Dozens of voices whispering in a language my conscious ear did not recognize, but that something inside me understood perfectly. Something that had started growing since the first session. Something that fed on my memories and grew stronger with each one it devoured. The voices spoke of doors and hunger. They spoke of things waiting on the other side. They spoke of the flesh as a vessel and the teeth as anchors. Dr. Mendoza welcomed me with his usual smile. That smile that now seemed to me like a butcher looking at a piece of meat. I told him I needed answers. I told him strange things were happening to me. I said I did not remember parts of my life that should be impossible to forget. I told him my teeth did not seem mine, that they moved, that they whispered. He nodded slowly, without losing his calm, as if he had been waiting for this conversation since the first day. He leaned back in his chair with his hands folded in his lap, and told me it was part of the process. He said the treatment was not just dental and never had been. He called it a complete transformation. He explained they were replacing the parts of me that were damaged with new, better, purer parts. He said the old teeth were full of memories, fears, and connections to a life that caused me pain. He claimed the new teeth were clean and empty, ready to be filled with something different. I asked him with a trembling voice what he was talking about while I felt something move inside my mouth. Something that responded to the doctor's words as if it recognized them. Dr. Mendoza took off his glasses and left them on the desk. He looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than his face. Eyes that had seen things no human being should see. Eyes that shone with a light that did not come from any lamp in the room. He said in a slow voice that teeth are doors. Doors between what we are and what we could be. He explained that every tooth they had taken from me was a closed door, a barrier that kept me prisoner of my old identity. He said every tooth they had put in was an open door, a channel connecting my flesh with something older, larger, and hungrier. He assured me I would soon be ready for what comes next. I demanded he explain what that meant. I threatened to go to the police, to report the clinic to the dental board, to tell everyone what they did here, and to ruin his business and his reputation, and everything he had built. Dr. Mendoza did not flinch. He just smiled with that kind smile that now seemed like the smile of a predator who knows his prey is already trapped. He told me in a calm, almost compassionate voice that I could not do that. He said I had already tried, even though I did not remember it. He claimed I had tried to go to the police 3 times, and 3 times I had forgotten why I was there before I could open my mouth to explain it. He described me standing in the police station, looking at the officer on duty, feeling the words evaporate from my mind like water on a hot iron. He said the new teeth did not let me talk about them. He said the new teeth protected them, that they were part of them now, and that very soon I would be too. I felt something move inside my mouth. It was something twisting, adjusting, reminding me who was in charge now. I asked with a defeated voice how many more sessions were left. Dr. Mendoza checked my file and said 2. He told me that after the 8th session I would be complete. He promised the memories I had lost would be replaced by better ones. He said the teeth they had given me would have taken root in my mind. And then I could truly join them. As a patient turned into a family member, I left the clinic knowing I should run away. I knew I should grab Elena and our son Daniel and disappear, go far away and start over in a place where they could not find me. But I did not do it, because that night, while I tried to sleep in bed next to a woman whose face was already starting to blur in my memory, I heard the voices of the teeth. Not in my dreams. Awake. With my eyes open, staring at the ceiling of my room. whispering inside my head with words I was now beginning to understand. Words that formed directly in my mind without going through my ears. They told me not to be afraid. They said what came next would be better than anything I had ever known. They claimed the memories I was losing were dead weight, ballast from a life that had not really been mine, a life full of pain and fear and disappointments. They promised that when the process was over I would be cleaner, purer, closer to what I always should have been. They said the Vicente who had existed for 45 years was just a draft, an imperfect sketch they were correcting line by line, memory by memory, tooth by tooth. And the worst part is that a part of me wanted to believe them. A part of me was tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of clinging to memories that fell apart like wet sand between my fingers. A part of me wanted to give up and let the teeth do their job, to let them empty everything I had been and fill it with something new, something that did not know pain or fear or loss. I went to the 7th session like a sleepwalker, with my feet moving on their own towards a destination I could no longer avoid. Dr. Mendoza welcomed me with his usual smile, his immaculate coat, and that smell of lavender that now seemed like the smell of something dead, disguised as something alive. I lay down in the chair without protesting. I closed my eyes without being asked. I listened to his words taking me to that place of deep relaxation I now recognized as something different, something that was not sleep, but submission, not rest, but surrender. When I woke up, I had forgotten Elena's face. I knew she was my wife. I knew her name, her voice, her smell, the way she sighed when she slept, and the sound of her laugh when she found something genuinely funny. But when I tried to visualize her face, I only saw a blur, a skin-colored smudge where her features should be, a hole in the shape of a person. It was like trying to remember the face of someone from a dream that fades upon waking, leaving only the feeling that something important was there, but is no longer. I went back home and stared at her for hours, trying to burn her image into my deteriorating memory. I sat across from her while we ate dinner, studying every line of her face, every gesture and every expression, mentally repeating what I saw as if it were a lesson I had to learn before an exam. But every time I looked away, even for a second, the memory dissolved like ink in water. Elena asked me what was wrong and why I was looking at her like that. I told her it was nothing, that I was just tired and that the dental treatment was exhausting me more than I expected. She believed me, or she pretended to believe me. At this point, I am no longer sure of anything. The 8th session is tomorrow. I know what is going to happen. I know that when I get up from that chair, I will have lost something else. Maybe the memory of my son. Maybe the memory of who I am. Maybe everything that makes me me and not something else. And I know I should not go. I know I should break the cycle, resist, and fight against what they have done to me. But the teeth will not let me. Every time I think about canceling the appointment, I feel a sharp pain that pierces my jaw, travels up to my brain, and leaves me paralyzed until the thought of fleeing disappears, and only the certainty remains that I must go, that I must complete the process, and that I must become what they want me to be. Tonight I have written down the names I have left before they disappear. My mother is Carmen. My wife is Elena. My son is Daniel. My sister is Alicia. Tomorrow at 5 I will no longer know who they are, but they will continue to exist somewhere, even if I can no longer remember them. And whatever is left of me after the 8th session will smile with perfect teeth while something ancient and hungry looks through my eyes. In the end, we realize too late that the fears we run from are often the only things protecting us. And by surrendering our pain to find an easy peace, we sometimes surrender the very essence of our humanity. My name is Adrian. I am 51 years old, and 3 months ago I hired the people who are destroying my mother from the inside. My mother is named Elvira, and she is 78 years old. She was a literature teacher for 40 years at the same high school, a brilliant woman who could recite poems from memory for hours, and who graded exams until 3 in the morning because she believed every student deserved detailed feedback. My father died 15 years ago, and since then she lived alone in the apartment where I grew up, surrounded by books and memories, proud of her independence. 2 years ago, she started forgetting small things like where she had left her keys, whether she had eaten or not, and the name of the neighbor she had been swapping recipes with for decades. At first, we thought it was normal, just a part of aging and nothing to worry about. But then she started getting lost. She was found 3 times wandering through streets she did not recognize, miles from her home, without knowing how she got there or how to get back. Once the police found her at 4 in the morning in her nightgown, barefoot, looking for the high school where she had worked because she thought she was late to teach a class. The diagnosis was mixed dementia with Alzheimer's components. The neurologist explained that she would progressively get worse, that there would be good days and bad days, and that eventually she would stop recognizing me. I could not leave her alone, but I could not leave my job either. I am an accountant at a medium-sized company, a divorced father of 2 teenagers who live with their mother, and my salary is my only income. A specialized nursing home cost more than 3,000 euros a month, money I did not have. Full-time professional caregivers were out of my reach. That was when I found the ad. It was on the bulletin board at the health center, where I took my mother for her checkups. Twilight Light Companionship Service. Comprehensive care for elderly people with special needs. Prices adapted to each family situation. Caregivers with dedication and experience. There was a phone number and an email address. I called without much hope. A woman with a warm and slow voice answered and introduced herself as Sister Consuelo. I explained my mother's situation, my financial limitations, and my desperation. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me not to worry, that her organization existed precisely to help families like mine, and that they would find a way to make it work. She gave me an appointment for that same week. The service headquarters was in an old house on the outskirts of the city, a stone building with a front garden full of flowers and a fountain in the center that made a relaxing sound. It looked more like a convent than an office, with discreet crucifixes on the walls and a faint smell of incense that permeated everything. Sister Consuelo was a woman in her 60s, thin, with gray hair gathered in a strict bun and dressed in simple dark clothing. She did not wear a habit, but she had that air of serenity we associate with nuns, that calm that seems to come from a deep and unbreakable faith. She explained that Twilight Light was a non-profit organization founded by a group of women who had dedicated their lives to caring for the elderly. They were not officially religious, but they shared a spirituality that guided their work. They believed that the elderly were keepers of wisdom and deserved to be treated with reverence, especially those whose minds had become fragile. The price she gave me was ridiculously low, less than what I paid for car insurance. I asked her how it was possible, and she smiled with that beatific smile that was already starting to seem characteristic to me. She said they had generous donors, people who shared their vision and wanted to help ensure no elderly person died alone or abandoned. I signed the contract that same afternoon. The caregivers started coming 3 days later. They were 3 women who took turns to cover the 24 hours, Sister Beatrice, Sister Lucia, and Sister Mercedes. None were real nuns, they explained, but they used the title as a sign of respect for their calling to serve. The 3 of them were perfect. Beatrice was in her 40s and had infinite patience. She could spend hours talking with my mother about books my mother no longer remembered reading, listening to the same repeated stories as if she were hearing them for the first time. Lucia was younger, maybe 30, and had soft hands that combed my mother's hair with a delicacy that made me feel guilty for not having that tenderness myself. Mercedes was the oldest, close to 60, and cooked meals that my mother devoured with an appetite I had not seen in months. The first few weeks were a miracle. My mother seemed calmer and more present. She slept better, she ate better, and she had fewer episodes of confusion. When she did have them, the caregivers knew how to calm her with an ease that was impossible for me. I started to be able to focus on work without feeling that constant guilt that had accompanied me for months. It was in the 4th week when my mother started saying strange things. I went to visit her on a Sunday morning as I did every week. Sister Beatrice opened the door with her usual smile and told me my mother had had a quiet night. When I entered the bedroom, my mother was sitting on the bed looking out the window with a vacant expression. I sat next to her and took her hand, telling her I was Adrian, her son. She looked at me with eyes that sometimes recognized me and sometimes did not. She told me with a clear voice that she knew who I was, that I was her boy, her only boy. It was one of her good days. We talked for a while about unimportant things, about the weather, about what she had eaten for dinner, and about a bird that came to land on the windowsill every morning. Then her expression changed. She became more serious and more present than I had seen her in months. She leaned toward me as if she feared someone would hear her and whispered that they came at night. I asked her who came, thinking it was another episode of confusion. She said the sisters came, but that they were not real sisters. They were something else. She said they came when they thought she was sleeping and did things. I asked her what kind of things they did. My mother looked toward the door to make sure we were alone. She told me they made promises to her and asked her to promise things in return. She said she promised because they scared her, but she could not remember what she promised when she woke up. She only knew she had promised something important, something she should not have promised. I stroked her hair, trying to calm her. I thought it was a dream, a nightmare caused by the illness. The neurologist had told me dementia causes hallucinations, and that it was normal for her to see things that did not exist and confuse dreams with reality. I told her I would talk to the caregivers and ask them to give her something to sleep better. My mother grabbed my wrist with a strength I did not expect. She whispered urgently that I should not tell them anything, because if they knew she had told me, they would come more often. She said they would come every night and take her with them when she was ready. I asked her where they were going to take her. She looked at me with eyes full of something that might have been fear, or might have been something else, something deeper and older. She said they would take her to the place they came from, the place where those who have promised go. I spoke to Sister Beatrice before I left. I told her what my mother had said, apologizing in case it sounded like an accusation. She listened to me patiently, and then smiled with that reassuring smile they all had. She said it was common in patients with dementia. She called them nocturnal confabulations, explaining that the brain tries to make sense of stimuli it does not understand, and creates narratives that mix reality with imagination. She suggested my mother probably heard them moving around the house during the night checking on her, and her mind interpreted it as something threatening. It seemed like a perfectly reasonable explanation to me, but things kept getting worse. Every time I visited my mother, she told me more details about the nighttime visits. The details were so specific and so consistent from one week to the next that I was starting to find it hard to dismiss them as mere confabulations of a sick mind. She said the sisters entered her room when the house was completely dark, always after midnight, always when the silence was so thick she could hear her own heartbeat. She said they positioned themselves around her bed, forming a perfect circle, each at a cardinal point, as if following a protocol rehearsed for years or decades or perhaps centuries. She said they lit candles that produced no smoke but did produce a strange smell. A smell of flowers that had been dead too long, of damp cemetery dirt, of something sweet and rotten all at once. She said they sang in a language that was not Spanish or English or French or any of the languages she had studied during her academic career. It was a language that sounded ancient, that sounded dead, that sounded like something spoken before the languages we know existed. And while they sang, their voices intertwined in a way that did not seem natural, as if they were a single voice coming from three mouths, or three voices forming something greater than the sum of their parts. She said they smeared something on her forehead, something cold and damp that smelled like the same dead flowers as the candles. She said they traced symbols on her skin with fingers that felt too cold to be alive, too precise to be human. She said they whispered questions in her ear, questions about her life, about her secrets, about things she had done and things she had thought and things she had dreamed. She said she answered involuntarily, unable to help it, as if the words came out of her mouth on their own, torn from some deep place where she kept everything she had never wanted to share with anyone. I asked her exactly what questions they asked her, and my mother frowned with that look of concentration I remembered from when she tried to recall a poem she had memorized decades ago. She said they asked her things about her life, about things she did a long time ago. They asked about secrets she never told anyone, not my father, not me, not her closest friends. She said they asked about choices she made, about paths she did not take, about people she hurt accidentally and people she hurt on purpose. She said she answered everything and told them everything, even though she did not want to, as if they were pulling the words out of her with an invisible hook. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but there was something in her eyes that told me she was completely lucid, more lucid than I had seen her in months. She also told me about the promises. Every night they asked her to promise something different. First it was small things, like promising not to talk about the visits. promising to trust them and promising to let them in whenever they came. But then the promises got bigger, stranger, and harder to remember in the morning. She told me on a Sunday with a trembling voice that they asked her to promise to give them something she had inside. She said she did not know what it was, but she knew it was important, and every night she was closer to giving it to them. I started to get suspicious. I installed a hidden camera in my mother's bedroom without telling anyone. It was small, the size of a button, hidden on a shelf between the books my mother could no longer read. It was motion activated and recorded onto a memory card that I checked every week. The first few nights the recording showed nothing strange. My mother slept, sometimes tossed around, and sometimes talked in her sleep. The caregivers occasionally came in to check on her, adjusted her blankets, and touched her forehead to see if she had a fever. Everything was perfectly normal. But in the third week, the camera recorded something different. It was 3 in the morning. My mother was sleeping soundly, with that slow and heavy breathing elderly people have when they truly rest. Then the door opened without making a sound. The 3 caregivers walked in. They were not wearing their usual clothes. They wore dark robes with hoods that partially hid their faces. In their hands they carried lit black candles that produced a strange yellowish light that did not look natural. They positioned themselves around my mother's bed, forming a triangle, with Beatrice at the head and Lucia and Mercedes on the sides. They began to sing in a low voice, a rhythmic murmur that rose and fell like waves on a night beach. I did not understand the words, but the sound gave me chills, as if something inside me recognized that chant, even though my mind could not identify it. My mother was still asleep, but her mouth began to move. She was talking, answering questions I could not hear. The caregivers leaned towards her, bringing their ears close to her lips, nodding their heads as if receiving valuable information. Then, Sister Beatrice took something from under her robe. It was a small, dark glass bottle. She opened it and poured a few drops of liquid on her fingers. Then she traced a symbol on my mother's forehead, a circle with lines radiating outward, while the other 2 intensified the singing. The recording lasted 47 minutes, 47 minutes of ritual while my mother slept and talked and promised things I could not hear. The next day I went to the house ready to kick them out. I was ready to call the police if necessary, ready to do whatever it took to protect my mother. But when I arrived, my mother was sitting in the living room drinking tea with the 3 caregivers. She was laughing and joking. She seemed more lucid than I had seen her in months. She told me anecdotes from her time as a teacher with a clarity that left me speechless. Sister Beatrice invited me to join them with that smile that already seemed sinister to me. I sat down and observed the scene, trying to reconcile what I saw with what the camera had recorded. My mother happy, the caregivers attentive. A perfect Sunday afternoon. When my mother went to rest, I confronted Sister Beatrice. I told her I knew what they did at night, showing her my phone with one of the frames from the recording. I expected her to deny it. I expected excuses, lies, and attempts at an explanation. But Sister Beatrice just smiled. She said in a calm voice that they wondered how long it would take me to find out. She claimed most relatives never do, because they are too grateful for the service, too relieved not to have to carry the responsibility, and too willing to look the other way. I demanded she explain what they were doing with my mother. Sister Beatrice said they were preparing her, just like they prepared everyone they cared for. She said their minds were already open and had already lost the barriers the rest of us have. She said they were perfect for what they needed. I asked her what they were perfect for. Sister Beatrice looked at me with eyes that suddenly looked much older than her face, eyes that had seen things I could not imagine. She said they were perfect for remembering. She explained that the elderly with dementia forget who they are but remember other things. Things from before, things from previous lives, things they knew when they were other people in other times. She said they only helped them access those memories to share them and to give them the knowledge they had accumulated over centuries of existence. I told her she was crazy. I told her I was going to call the police and that they were all going to jail for what they were doing to my mother. Sister Beatrice did not flinch. She told me I could call anyone I wanted and show my recordings to anyone I wanted. She said nobody would believe me. She explained that people would only see 3 caregivers checking on an elderly woman with dementia at night. The candles would look like flashlights in the recording. The chants would seem like lullabies and the ritual would look like an innocent night care routine. I looked at the video on my phone and saw she was right. What I had clearly seen as a ritual now looked blurry, ambiguous, and easily explainable. The robes looked like bathrobes, the candles looked like lamps, and the chanting seemed like a soothing murmur. I whispered, asking how it was possible. Sister Beatrice said what I recorded was real, but only eyes that know how to see can interpret it correctly. She said everyone else would see what they expect to see, which is caregivers doing their job. I told her I was taking my mother, that the service was over, and that they would never go near her again. Sister Beatrice nodded slowly. She told me I was free to do so, but that I needed to know something before making that decision. She said my mother had promised a lot in these months, promises that could not be broken. She warned that if I took her before she fulfilled what she promised, they would come looking for her. She clarified that it would not be them, but what was behind them. She assured me that it was much worse for us to finish the process than for what was waiting on the other side to finish it. I asked her what was on the other side. She smiled with genuine sadness and admitted she did not know. She said they had been doing this for generations, and none of them had seen what was on the other side. She said they only knew it needed what the elderly have: the memories, the promises, and the souls that have lived many times and accumulated debts over the centuries. She said my mother had a very old debt, and that was why they found her and came to her. That was 3 weeks ago. I did not take my mother. I did not call the police. I did not do anything I had planned to do. Because that same night my mother had an episode. It was not a normal dementia episode. It was something different. She woke up screaming in a language I had never heard. A language that sounded ancient, that sounded dead, that sounded like something that should not be pronounced with human vocal cords. Her eyes were open, but they saw nothing of this world. Her body arched on the bed as if something were pulling her from the inside, as if something were trying to get out or get in, or both at the same time. It lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the caregivers were exhausted, but my mother slept peacefully, as if nothing had happened. Sister Beatrice explained that this was what happened when the promises started to be claimed, when what was on the other side grew impatient and decided to take instead of receive. She told me that if I let them finish the process, the promises would be fulfilled in an orderly manner, and my mother would not suffer. She said she would spend her last months in peace, and when the time came, she would go quietly, without pain and without fear. But she warned that if I interfered, if I tried to take her or stop them, the thing coming to claim what was promised would not be so kind. I tried taking her to my house one night, just one night, to see what would happen, to prove to myself that it was all an elaborate scam, and that Sister Beatrice's threats were just empty words designed to keep me scared and obedient. I picked up my mother on a Friday afternoon, telling the caregivers I wanted to spend the weekend with her. They did not protest or try to dissuade me. They only exchanged a look that I could not interpret then, but that I now recognize as something akin to pity. My mother was happy to come to my apartment. We had dinner together, watched an old movie she liked, and talked about unimportant things. For a moment it seemed that everything was normal, that the sisters and the rituals and the promises did not exist, that it was just a son taking care of his sick mother as he should have done from the beginning. I put her to bed in my room and I stayed on the living room couch. I locked all the doors and windows. I put a chair against the front door. I turned on all the hallway lights so there would be no darkness where anything could hide. It was useless. At 3 in the morning I heard a noise coming from my room. When I opened the door, I found my mother standing by the window, looking out with unblinking eyes. Her arms were extended to her sides, palms up, as if she were offering something or receiving something or both at the same time. And she was talking. She was whispering in that ancient language that made my blood run cold. That language that sounded like stones falling into bottomless pits, like wind blowing through millennial ruins, like something that should not exist in this world or any other. I tried to touch her, but when my hand approached her shoulder, I felt a cold that burned my skin. The next day, I had a mark on my fingers, a cold burn that took weeks to heal. My mother stepped away from the window and walked towards the apartment door. It was locked, but she stood there looking at the wood, whispering those words I did not understand, but that made me nauseous just hearing them. And on the other side of the door, I heard something. I heard soft, rhythmic knocks, like knuckles knocking with infinite patience. It was a rhythm that was not human, that was too regular, too constant, like the heartbeat of a heart that does not need rest, and a voice that was not human saying my mother's name, Elvira, 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 repeating it with a tenderness that was obscene, with a hunger disguised as affection, with an implicit promise that it would come to collect what it was owed no matter how many doors I had locked or how many lights I had turned on. My mother tried to open the door. She pulled on the knob with a strength a 78-year-old woman with dementia should not have. She hit the wood with her fists until her knuckles bled, and all the while she kept whispering in that language that came from a place I did not want to know. I took her back to her house at 4 in the morning. The caregivers were waiting for me at the door, without surprise, without reproach, only with that patient smile that no longer seemed maternal to me, but hungry. Now I understand what Sister Beatrice meant. There are worse things than what they do. There are things waiting in the dark, things that feed on unfulfilled promises, things that collect debts in ways I do not want to imagine. The caregivers are the lesser evil, and I, the son who should protect his mother, have chosen the lesser evil. Every Sunday I go to visit her and she tells me the same stories, sometimes confuses me with my father, and asks me about grandchildren I do not have. And I smile and nod and pretend everything is fine while knowing that every night a part of her disappears, given to something I do not understand, sacrificed to something that scares me more than death. I do not know how much time she has left. I do not know what will happen when she has given everything she has to give. I only know that when that time comes I will be there, holding her hand, looking into her eyes, pretending I do not know what I did to her when I handed her over to the Sisters of Twilight Light. I will pretend I am not as much of a monster as they are, even though I know that maybe I am worse. Because they do what they do out of conviction, out of faith, out of service to something greater than themselves. I did it out of convenience. I did it to avoid carrying the responsibility. I did it so I could sleep peacefully while my mother paid the price. And that is something no confession will ever be able to cleanse. In the end, we convince ourselves that our choices are made out of necessity. But the truth is we simply choose the monster that lets us sleep at night, ignoring the fact that the ultimate debt will be paid by the ones we were supposed to protect.